I never should have opened that bottle of wine. It was a Malbec, one of the good ones I'd been saving. I don't even know why I pulled it from the rack that night. Maybe I was already restless, maybe some part of me had known for weeks that something was wrong and I just needed the warmth of alcohol to dull the edges. Whatever the reason, I let the deep red liquid pour into my glass, sat back on the couch, and tried to ignore the gnawing in my gut. It had started as a whisper, a subtle shift in the air between us, a glance too quickly averted, a text message answered a little too fast, phone tilted out of sight. She hadn't noticed me watching. Or maybe she had and she simply didn't care. That night, she came home late. Not the kind of late that could be explained away by work or errands. The kind of late that carried perfume that wasn't meant for me. The kind of late where she walked in with a glow on her face, the kind of glow she hadn't had in years, not after date nights, not after vacations, not after I had spent years trying to be the man she wanted. She didn't see me at first. I was in the dimly lit living room, half a glass in, watching the door like some pathetic guard dog who had already lost the battle. When she finally noticed me, she flinched. Not much. Just a flicker. But I caught it. Didn't know you were still up, she said, kicking off her heels. Her voice was smooth, easy, like she hadn't just walked in smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Like she hadn't just come from somewhere she shouldn't have been. Yeah. Opened a bottle. Thought you'd want a glass. I gestured at the wine, my voice steady. Controlled. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smiled, stepped forward, took the glass from my hand. She took a slow sip, watching me over the rim. You always know how to pick the good ones. Something inside me clenched at that. The words were casual, but they felt off. Like she was laughing at something I wasn't in on. I forced a smile. Big night? She shrugged. Work dinner ran late. You know how it is. A test. She was testing me. Seeing if I'd bite. I didn't. Not yet. Must have been a great dinner. I gestured vaguely at her. The glow, the scent, the looseness in her posture. She looked like someone who had been well-fed in more ways than one. She smirked. That same smirk she used to give me when we were younger, when she knew she had me wrapped around her finger. It was fine. You're overthinking again, Danny. Danny. She hadn't called me that in years. Not since before the distance had started creeping in. Not since before she had started forgetting the little things. How I liked my coffee. Which side of the bed I preferred. How I always reached for her hand when we crossed the street. But now, suddenly, she was using it again? Like a charm she could dust off whenever she needed it? I said nothing. Just let the silence stretch between us. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then sighed, rolling her eyes like I was being difficult. I'm taking a shower. She walked away, leaving her glass half full on the coffee table. I waited until I heard the water running before I moved. Her purse was still on the kitchen counter. It was an expensive leather thing, one of the many luxury items she had insisted she needed over the years. I'd never been the type to snoop. I had always trusted her. I wish I hadn't. Her phone wasn't inside, of course. She was smarter than that. But there was a receipt. A receipt from a restaurant I didn't recognize. A restaurant I knew damn well wasn't where she had told me she'd be. 1 bottle of wine. 2 entrees. A dessert for 2. And at the bottom, the name of the person who paid. Brad. My fingers clenched around the paper. My breath turned sharp. I had never heard her mention a Brad before. But I was about to. I sat there with the receipt in my hand, feeling like the air in the room had turned thick, heavy. My pulse thumped in my ears, drowning out the sound of the shower running upstairs. I stared at the name, Brad, like maybe if I looked at it long enough, the letters would rearrange themselves into something innocent. Something that didn't feel like a knife sliding between my ribs. But they didn't. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping that slip of paper like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Long enough for the water upstairs to shut off. Long enough to hear her footsteps move around the bedroom, the dresser drawers opening, the faint rustle of fabric as she changed into her pajamas. I could have marched up there, could have thrown the receipt in her face and demanded an answer. But I didn't. Not yet. Because something in me needed more. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was that stupid, pathetic part of me that still wanted to believe she'd look me in the eye and tell me it wasn't what I thought it was. So I waited. I heard her footsteps come down the stairs. She was in those silk pajama shorts she always wore, the ones I had bought her years ago. She used to curl up against me in them, tugging my arm around her waist on cold nights. Now, the sight of them just made my stomach twist. She barely glanced at me as she passed. "You're still up?" I nodded. She yawned, stretching her arms above her head. "I'm exhausted. That dinner ran way too late. You should come to bed soon." My grip tightened on the receipt. That dinner. Like it had been some dull business meeting. Like it hadn't been a lie. She had no idea I knew. No idea that in the last 10 minutes, something inside me had cracked wide open. I watched her walk toward the couch. Watched as she picked up her wine glass and took another slow sip, completely at ease. I finally spoke. "Who's Brad?" The words landed between us like a gunshot. Her hand froze around the glass. For the first time that night, I saw it, just a flicker, just for a split second. The hesitation, the recalculating, the split-second decision of which lie to reach for. Then, just as quickly, she smiled. Relaxed, effortless. "Brad? Oh, he's just someone from work." "Why? Just someone from work?" I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. "Because this says he paid for your dinner," I said, holding up the receipt. She blinked. Then, instead of panicking like a guilty person should, she laughed. Actually laughed. "Jesus, Danny," she said, shaking her head. "You're looking through my stuff now?" "You left it in your purse," I said. "In our kitchen." "Yeah, and you dug through it like some paranoid boyfriend," she shot back. "That's really fucking charming, by the way." I felt my jaw clench. She was the one lying, and somehow I was the bad guy here? She sighed, rubbing her temple like I was exhausting her. "Look, Brad's just a coworker. We had a business dinner, he picked up the check. That's all. I didn't think I needed to report every little thing to you." "Funny," I said, standing up, "because you told me you were having dinner with Emily and Lauren tonight." The words hit their mark. I saw it in the way her expression faltered, the way her fingers curled slightly around the wine glass. Another calculation, another quick reach for a way out. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I was supposed to, but they canceled, and I had to go to this dinner instead. It was last minute. Last minute." I let the words hang there, flat and empty. "Yes, Danny," she said, exasperated. "It was last minute. Jesus, why are you making this into a thing?" "Because you're lying." Her eyes snapped to mine. For a second, just a second, something flickered in them. A warning, a silent back off. Then, just like that, she scoffed, rolled her eyes, took another slow sip of wine. "You're ridiculous," she muttered. "Ridiculous. Not heartbroken. Not betrayed. Not right." I took a slow breath, my hands curling into fists. "Where were you tonight?" "I told you. At a work dinner. With Brad." "Yes. And this work dinner," I said, my voice tight, "did it involve you laughing at his jokes? Leaning in real close? Wearing that diamond necklace I've never seen before?" "That did it." Her entire body went still. She set the glass down carefully on the table. Then, finally, she looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time in a long, long time, I saw her. The real her. Not the wife I thought I knew. Not the woman I had loved for 13 years. But a stranger. And the stranger smiled. "Wow," she murmured. "You have been watching me, haven't you?" The way she said it, like it was something amusing. Like it was a game she had been playing and I had only just caught up. I felt something hot rise in my chest. Something that wasn't just anger but something uglier. Something I wasn't sure I could shove back down. "I know you're cheating on me," I said, voice low. She didn't even blink. And then, wine-drunk and loose-limbed, she laughed. Not nervous. Not panicked. Just laughed. "You were just the safe option, Danny," she said, shaking her head. "My backup plan." The words slammed into me, heavy and brutal and unfiltered. She leaned back against the couch, stretching like a cat. I never loved you in our 13 years together. Brad was always the one I truly wanted. She said it so easily. Like it was just another boring fact. Like it wasn't designed to destroy me. Then, as if she hadn't just ripped my heart out and stomped on it, she sighed and closed her eyes. And just like that, she fell asleep. Still wearing the diamond necklace I had never seen before. By sunrise, I made my choice. No screaming. No final confrontation. No pathetic begging for the truth. I vanished. No notes. No goodbyes. Just gone. I don't remember much of that night after she passed out. I remember staring at her, at the way she sprawled out on the couch, completely at peace, like she hadn't just admitted to wasting over a decade of my life. Like she hadn't laughed in my face about it. I remember standing there for what felt like hours, staring at the necklace. That damn necklace. The one he gave her. The one she didn't even have the decency to hide when she walked through her front door. I could have woken her up. Could have shaken her until she opened those smug, wine-heavy eyes and demanded to know why. Why she chose me if she never wanted me. Why she stayed for 13 years if I was just some safety net. But I already knew the answer, didn't I? She had used me. And now she was done. Something in me snapped into place. A cold, mechanical shift. I was leaving. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. I moved quietly. I walked upstairs, stepped into the bedroom that had belonged to us but had really just been hers all along, and started packing. I didn't take much. A duffel bag. Clothes. Essentials. Nothing that would be missed, nothing that would leave an obvious hole. I wanted her to wake up and feel nothing out of place. I wanted her to think, even for a second, that she still had control. And then I wanted that realization to hit. The slow, creeping dread when she saw my empty side of the closet. The absence of my things in the bathroom. The way my presence, the thing she had taken for granted for so many years, had simply vanished. I wanted her to feel that silence. The last thing I took was my wedding ring. I had every intention of leaving it behind. Some dramatic final gesture, some message she could wake up to. But at the last second I hesitated. Not because of her. Not because of what it meant. But because I wanted to remember. Not her. Not us. But this. This exact moment. The moment I realized what I had been to her. A placeholder. A convenience. A backup plan. I slid the ring into my pocket and walked out. The night air was cold when I stepped outside. Colder than it should have been for this time of year. I stood there for a second, duffel bag over my shoulder, just breathing. Just listening to the quiet. Everything felt sharper. The streetlights. The hum of a car passing in the distance. The weight of my keys in my hand. I wasn't sad. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, all I felt was done. I threw my bag into the car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. Not once. I drove for hours. No destination. No plan. Just asphalt and headlights and the quiet hum of my thoughts. At some point, I stopped at a gas station. I bought a coffee I didn't drink, stood outside with my hands in my pockets, watching the empty road stretch ahead of me. I checked my phone. No calls. No texts. She hadn't noticed yet. I wasn't surprised. I kept driving. By morning, I was 100 miles away. 200. I didn't check. I didn't care. I found a motel off the highway. One of those nameless, forgettable places with flickering neon signs and front desks that didn't ask too many questions. The guy behind the counter handed me a key without looking at me twice. Room 107. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. And that's when it hit me. Not the anger. Not the betrayal. The weight of nothing. No home. No wife. No life waiting for me. Just space. I pulled out my phone. Still nothing from her. I should have turned it off. Tossed it in the bag and ignored it. Instead, I opened our text history. 13 years of messages. Some stupid, some sweet. Some from years ago when she still pretended to love me. And then, at the very top of the thread, a text from her. Just one word. Danny? I stared at it. I didn't answer. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything. There was nothing to say. Nothing she deserved to hear. Danny? That was it. Not where are you? Not why are your things gone? Not even a single goddamn question mark that might suggest real concern. Just my name. A test. A thread. Thin and weak. tossed in my direction to see if I would still catch it. I locked my phone and dropped it onto the bed. The motel room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made your own breathing sound loud, that made you aware of how alone you really were. The walls were stained with time, the carpet worn down by the ghosts of people who had probably checked in with their own secrets, their own running. I leaned forward, pressing my hands together, elbows on my knees. My wedding ring was still in my pocket, a small, solid weight pressing against my thigh. I pulled it out and held it between my fingers, watching the way the dull morning light caught the edges. 13 years. 13 years of anniversaries, of inside jokes, of vacations and holidays and lazy Sundays, of thinking we were happy, of believing she chose me because she wanted to, and all of it had been a lie. I clenched my fist around the ring, pressing the metal so hard into my palm that it stung. I thought about what she said. You were just the safe option. I had replayed those words in my head at least 100 times since I left. Every time they cut deeper. Safe. Not loved. Not cherished. Not the man she wanted to build a life with. Just safe. A reliable investment. A steady, predictable placeholder until something better came along. And now that something better had a name. Brad. Who the hell was he? The thought burned through me like acid. Not because I wanted her back. God, no. That part of me was dead. But because I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away for someone I didn't even know. Someone who had been there, lurking in the background of our lives, while I went on oblivious. I wanted to know what he had that I didn't. I wanted to see him, not to fight him, not to scream in his face. That wasn't me. I just needed to see. Because once I saw, maybe I'd understand. Maybe I'd get why I had never been enough. I reached for my phone before I could stop myself. The search was easy. I knew where she worked, and I knew that Brad was supposedly a coworker. I typed in the company name, followed by Brad. A few seconds later, there he was. My stomach turned. He wasn't better than me. Not in the way I had expected. I don't know what I had pictured. Someone younger, someone built like a model, someone who radiated whatever it was I apparently lacked. But Brad was fine. Older than me by at least 5 years. Decent looking in a forgettable way. The kind of guy you'd see in a meeting and immediately forget once you walked out of the room. But there was something in his expression. Something smug. Something sharp. Something that made my skin crawl. I kept scrolling. And then I saw it. A picture from a company retreat. Him. Smiling. And right next to him, her. Katie. Not in a professional, we're just co-workers kind of way. Not even in a casual, standing near each other by accident way. She was pressed up against him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. His arm draped lazily around her waist. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. Like no one else in the world existed. The date on the photo was 3 years ago. I stared at it, my pulse pounding. 3 years. I did the math in my head, but I didn't really need to. 3 years ago, we had just celebrated our 10th anniversary. I had taken her to Paris, walked with her along the Seine, kissed her under the Eiffel Tower like a goddamn idiot while she smiled and told me she loved me. Meanwhile, she was already his, already looking at him the way she had once looked at me. A sound tore out of me. Something between a laugh and a breath and a bitter, broken exhale. I had been a joke. A walking, talking joke for 3 goddamn years. I closed my eyes, inhaling slow, steady. My hands were shaking. I had left. That was supposed to be it. I was supposed to be done. But I wasn't. Not yet. I had one more thing to do. I needed to see her. One last time. I knew exactly where she'd be. Katie was a creature of habit. Every Saturday morning, without fail, she went to the same overpriced cafe in the heart of downtown. She liked the pastries, claimed they were authentic French, even though I always told her they were nothing special. She liked the atmosphere, the soft jazz music, the rustic wooden tables that made everything look like it belonged in an Instagram post. Most of all, she liked being seen. I parked across the street, keeping the engine running. The cafe's outdoor seating area was already half full, people sipping their lattes, reading newspapers they probably didn't care about, scrolling through their phones like the world beyond the screen didn't exist. And then I saw her, sitting at a corner table, legs crossed, coffee cup in hand, looking as if she hadn't just burned down our entire marriage 2 nights ago. She wasn't alone. Brad. Of course. He sat across from her, leaning back in his chair with that same smug expression I had seen in the photo. He looked comfortable, relaxed, like a man who had already won. I gripped the steering wheel, jaw tight. I could have left, could have driven away and let them have each other. But I didn't. I got out of the car. The cafe door chimed as I stepped inside. The air smelled like espresso and fresh bread, warm and inviting. People barely glanced up as I walked past them. But Katie? The second she saw me, her entire body stiffened. For the first time since that night, I saw something crack in her perfect, practiced expression. Brad, on the other hand, didn't react at all. He just glanced up, blinked, then looked at Katie like he was waiting for her to handle it. I smiled. "Morning," I said, sliding into the empty chair at their table. Katie recovered quickly. Too quickly. Her lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smirk but looked more like a defense mechanism. "Danny. Just my name. Not 'oh my God, where have you been?' Not 'I woke up and you were gone.' Not even 'what the hell are you doing here?' Just Danny." Like I was a stranger she had run into at the grocery store. I leaned back, draping my arm over the chair. "You didn't call." Her eyes flickered. "Didn't think you wanted to hear from me. You thought, right?" A pause. A beat of silence. Brad shifted in his seat, finally acknowledging me. "Listen, man," I turned to him. "You must be Brad." He hesitated, then extended a hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of the wreckage of my marriage. "Yeah. And you must be." I didn't shake his hand. His smirk faltered. I looked back at Katie. 3 years. She said nothing. I let the words hang between us. Let her feel them. Let him feel them. Brad cleared his throat. "Look, I get that this is... Do you?" I cut him off, tilting my head. "You get it? You understand what it's like to wake up one day and realize the person you've spent over a decade with never actually loved you." His jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." I laughed. A quiet, humorless sound. "It's exactly what happened." Katie sighed. "Danny, what do you want?" I studied her. The way she held herself, shoulders squared, chin lifted. A woman who thought she had nothing left to lose. A woman who had already rewritten the narrative in her head. He was weak. He left. I win. I smiled, slow and easy. "Just came to see how quickly you'd moved on. Guess I got my answer." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." Brad placed a hand on the table. A casual, possessive gesture. "Listen, I get that this is hard for you." "Oh, do you?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You get what it's like to have your wife lie to your face for years? To listen to her laugh while she tells you she never actually wanted you?" His fingers twitched. He didn't like being challenged. Didn't like that I wasn't backing down. Katie exhaled loudly, leaning back in her chair. "Danny, we were over long before you left." My head tilted. "That's funny. You never mentioned that part." She arched a brow. "Would it have changed anything?" I stared at her. No remorse. No guilt. Just cold, calculated indifference. Brad looked between us, then shook his head. "Look, man. We're just trying to have breakfast. If you came here to..." "I came here to see for myself," I said, cutting him off again. His eyes darkened. "And?" I pushed back my chair, standing up slowly. "And now I have." I turned to Katie one last time. "You always said you wanted an exciting life. Something unpredictable." I smiled. "Hope you enjoy it." Then I walked away. Not in anger. Not in defeat. Just done. For real this time. I didn't look back as I walked out of that cafe. I didn't need to. I could feel her watching me, could feel the weight of her gaze pressing against my back. Not in regret. Not in sorrow. Just calculation. Like she was already adjusting the story in her head, shifting the pieces to make herself look better. To make me the unreasonable one. I didn't care. I had what I came for. I had seen. I pushed through the door, stepping out onto the street, inhaling deep. The morning air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. The world outside was moving, alive, completely unaffected by the wreckage I had just walked away from. And for the first time in days, I felt something close to clarity. I knew what I had to do next. I drove without thinking. Just let the road pull me forward, block after block, until I realized where I was heading. Our house? No, her house. I pulled up across the street, the engine idling as I stared at the place I had called home for over a decade. Funny how different it looked now. Before, it had always been ours. The white shutters she insisted on. The hydrangeas she planted in the front yard but never actually took care of. The stupid wind chimes she bought on a whim that drove me insane every time a storm rolled through. Yeah? Now it was just a building. Wood and glass and a roof over someone else's life. I had left in the middle of the night. No note. No warning. Just walked away, leaving everything behind. My clothes. My books. The framed photos that had once meant something but now felt like evidence of my own stupidity. But there were things I still needed. Not sentimental things. Not us things. Just me. So I went inside. The key still worked. Of course it did. She hadn't expected me to come back. Hadn't even considered the possibility. The house was eerily quiet. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Everything was exactly as I had left it. A glass on the coffee table. The blanket on the couch. Rumpled from where she had passed out that night, still wearing his necklace. I moved quickly, up the stairs, into the bedroom. My duffel bag was still where I had left it, half-zipped, waiting for me to come back and finish what I had started. I grabbed more clothes, my passport, the expensive watch my dad had given me years ago, the one I never wore but couldn't bear to part with. And then, at the last second, I opened her nightstand drawer. There was a box inside. Small, wooden, the one she always kept locked. I knew what was in it. Love letters. Old notes. Anniversary cards. Every piece of paper I had ever given her. Stored away like a time capsule of our marriage. A younger version of me had found comfort in that box. Had told himself it meant something. That it mattered. I reached in, grabbed the entire thing, and walked downstairs, into the kitchen, where I threw it straight into the trash. I didn't even open it. Didn't even look at the pieces of myself I had once poured into her hands. Just dumped it. The sound of the wooden box hitting the bottom of the bin was final. I turned around and froze. Katie was standing in the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. She wasn't supposed to be here. We stared at each other. Her gaze flicked to my bag, to the open trash can. Then, slowly, she crossed her arms. Didn't think you had the guts to come back. I exhaled through my nose. I'm not back. Her eyes narrowed. Really? Because it looks like you are. I ignored her, zipping up my bag. Just grabbing my things. She scoffed. Oh, how kind of you to leave me all your crap. I didn't rise to it. Didn't bite. That's what she wanted, anger, reaction. Proof that I still cared. I swung the bag over my shoulder. I'll be out of your way in 2 minutes. She tilted her head, watching me, studying. Then, with a smirk, she leaned against the counter. So, did you enjoy breakfast? I stilled. Her smile widened. You really thought I wouldn't see you? You think I don't know you? She knew. She always knew. I kept my voice even. I wanted to see for myself. She laughed. A soft, cruel little thing. And? Did it hurt? Something flickered through me. Not pain. Not sadness. Just exhaustion. I don't feel anything for you anymore, I said simply. And for the first time since this entire mess started, her smirk disappeared. For a second, just a second, she looked almost surprised. Almost. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. Good, she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Neither do I. I smiled. Not because I believed her, but because I didn't care. Not anymore. I stepped past her, walking to the door, and right before I left, I turned back one last time. Have fun with Brad. Then I walked out. For good. I didn't look back this time. I walked out of that house. The house that had once been ours but had never really been mine, and I didn't stop. Not when I reached the car. Not when I threw my bag into the passenger seat. Not even when I started the engine and pulled away, leaving behind 13 years of history like it was nothing more than an abandoned building on the side of the road. Because that's all it was now. A place I used to exist. A place where I had spent years trying to be good enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't. I drove. Just drove. No destination, no plan, just road. The city blurred past me, the familiar streets turning into something distant, unrecognizable. I should have felt relief. Freedom. Something. But I didn't. I just felt empty. It was a strange thing, grief. Not the kind that hits you all at once, knocking the breath from your lungs. No, this was different. This was slow. Heavy. Like a weight pressing down on my chest, quiet and suffocating. I had walked away. That should have been the hardest part. But somehow now felt worse. Because now there was nothing left to do. No more fighting. No more anger. No more watching her lie to my face and pretending I didn't see it. Just silence. I don't know how long I drove. Maybe an hour. Maybe 3. Time felt stretched, distant, meaningless. At some point, I ended up at a gas station. One of those rundown places just outside the city, the kind with flickering lights and an old man behind the counter who didn't care if you paid for gas first. I got out, stretched my legs, grabbed a bottle of water from inside. When I stepped back out, my phone buzzed. I froze. I hadn't checked it since that morning. Since that one text from Katie, the half-hearted attempt to see if I was still on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought it would be her again. That maybe after I had walked out of the house, she had something else to say. But it wasn't Katie. It was a number I didn't recognize. No message. Just a missed call. I stared at the screen, something uneasy curling in my gut. A second later, another call. Same number. This time I answered. Yeah? A pause. Then Danny. The voice wasn't hers. It was a man's. For a split second, my mind went to Brad. But no. It wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone familiar in a way that sent a slow, cold chill through my bones. Who is this? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. A breath. Then it's Luke. I stiffened. Luke. I hadn't heard from him in years. Not since we were kids, barely out of high school, before life had pulled us in different directions. We had been close once, brothers in everything but blood. And then, somewhere along the way, we had just stopped. I leaned against my car, exhaling. Didn't expect to hear from you. Yeah, he said, and there was something in his voice. Something off. Look, man, I don't even know how to say this. I frowned. Say what? A pause. And then when he spoke again, his words sent my world tilting sideways. It's about Katie. Something in my stomach turned to ice. I gripped the phone tighter. What about her? Luke hesitated. Then she's been seeing Brad for longer than you think. My pulse pounded. Yeah, I figured that out already. No, his voice was quiet, serious. You didn't. The world around me felt like it was shrinking. The hum of the gas station lights, the distant sound of cars on the highway, it all faded into the background. Luke exhaled. She's been cheating on you since the beginning, man. Since before you were even married. I went still. My breath caught. The ground beneath me shifted, cracked, collapsed. Danny? I barely heard him. Before we were married. Before everything. Katie had never been faithful. Not once. Not even in the beginning. Every single moment. Every kiss. Every I love you. Every goddamn anniversary. All of it. A lie. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Luke hesitated. Man. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know if it was my place. But when I heard you left, I figured I cut him off. How do you know? Silence. Then quietly, because I saw it. The world tilted again. I saw her, he continued. Years ago. Back when you two had just gotten engaged. I caught her with some guy. I don't even know if it was Brad, but it doesn't matter. I confronted her about it. Told her I'd tell you. My heart slammed against my ribs. And? Another pause. Then, softer, she told me she'd ruin you if I did. Something inside me snapped. Ruin me. My voice came out flat. Dangerous. She said if I told you, she'd make sure you lost everything. Your job, your friends, your reputation. She said you'd never believe me anyway. I swallowed, my throat dry as sandpaper. She was right, I murmured. Luke let out a breath. Yeah, because if he had told me back then, would I have believed him? Would I have looked at Katie, the woman I thought I loved, and seen the truth? Or would I have told him he was wrong? That she would never do something like that? I didn't know. And that made it worse. Much, much worse. I ran a hand over my face, my pulse a heavy thud in my ears. Why now? Because I saw you left, Luke said. And I figured, maybe you were finally ready to hear it. I closed my eyes. Ready. Like this was something I had needed to prepare for. Like the last few days hadn't already ripped me apart. Like I still had something left inside me to break. But I didn't. Not anymore. I opened my eyes, staring at the dark stretch of road ahead. I knew what I had to do, because I was done running. It was time for Katie to face me one last time. And this time, she wouldn't be the one in control. That I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The gas station lights flickered above me, casting long shadows across the empty lot. The distant hum of cars on the highway blurred into white noise. I felt nothing. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just a hollow, stretching kind of silence inside me. 3 days ago, I thought I had lost my wife. Now, I realized I had never really had her. She had been lying since the very beginning. Before the vows. Before the house.